Right. Well, I'll assume everybody's now back and listening, even if they're muted and off camera. So yes, we are going to now have a presentation from Luke around Bière de Garde, a style which I have got absolutely no idea what it is. Really, I've got a very rough idea, but style there's not many. I don't see many examples of them around in this country. But the couple I have tried have been really nice. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So Luke, take it away.
Thanks very much. Right, share the screen. Everyone got that?
Yep.
Great, okay. Okay, so just sort of split this up into a few different parts. So first of all, we'll look at what is Bière de Garde, then talk about some of the classic examples you can get out there, then move on to how to brew it. There's a couple of recipes, and then just some resources if you want to look it up, some further information on it. So what is Bière de Garde? So it is a malty French farmhouse beer. De Garde means to lager, so sort of literal translation is beer for keeping. So what you typically have is a period of lagering after fermentation for 4 to 6 weeks or so. So these were traditionally brewed after the harvest and then laid down for some period of time to be enjoyed the next year. It isn't a French version of a saison, so they're often grouped together. So they do have a shared heritage, obviously both being farmhouse ales. There's 3 distinct substyles. So we've got blonde, amber, and brown, and they are traditionally brewed in Nord and Pas de Calais in northern France. So Calais, and then sort of follows the Belgian border. Then they sort of went underground, if you like, and stopped being commercially brewed sometime between the wars. Brasserie Dijk reintroduced it in the 1950s. There was a lot of popularity of Belgian specialty beers amongst students in Lille, and so they introduced Geneline Blonde, amber, and that's sort of the first sort of commercially available one that was rebrewed after it disappeared, essentially. So they're not the easiest to find here, as James said. Some online retailers, so Beautiful Beers, have a couple. Some French delis might have it. I've got a wine shop that has various ones in sometimes, or have a road trip to Calais. So there's a couple of related styles which include Bière de Printemps, which is a spring beer. So it's also called Bière de Mars. So that's got sort of a shared, not history, but it's like Märzen is brewed in Mars, that same sort of thing. And Bière de Noël, which is just a Christmas beer. So it's likely that the historical versions would have had some form of lactic acid bacteria and Brett character. They aren't appropriate for, well, the BJCP style anyway, but a lot of Americans are sort of, especially if anyone's a member of the Saison and Bière de Garde group on Facebook, there's quite a lot of Americans that are sort of looking more at that historical style and having some lactic acid bacteria in there and using those kinds of yeasts and bacteria. So hopefully you can see in the background here, this is where some of the breweries are based. So you can see there's the Belgian border. So you've got Calais here, and then, so they're quite clustered. Obviously it is a fairly large area, but they're really just concentrated in the north there. So these are some classic examples. So I've put Good Ale in there, which you can get in Morrison's. It's probably a bit of an outlier because they use orange peel and coriander, and it has probably more yeast character than you'd really expect. But it's worth a go if you have a Morrison's near you. So these are the guidelines. I won't bother reading that all out, so I'm sure you've all got access to that. And just moving on to how you would brew it. So typically use French or Belgian malts. We don't really see much French malt over here, so probably stick to Belgian. So blonde would have a grist of say 80 to 90 Pilsner, and then I can't add out, that should be 10 to 20. Munich or Vienna. Then we'll also have some small specialty malts, so biscuit, aromatic, something like that, just to give it a bit of a toasted character. For amber, which is probably the one that I most enjoy, there's sort of two approaches to it. So I don't know if anyone's read the Farmhouse Owls book by Phil Markowski, but he's sort of made a distinction between what would be the traditional method, which is essentially mostly Pilsner malt and then a really long boil, at least 3 hours, and that would help to darken what would have been a relatively pale grist to start with, or the modern, so that's got a lot more specialty malts in it, so stuff like Cara Vienna, Cara Munich, things like that. And then brown, which I've never had a brown one. I've never seen it for sale anywhere. Yeah, that's sort of half Pilsner, half Munich, a bit of crystal and special B, and then just some Carafa special for colour. So moving on to hops, and traditionally they use Alsatian hops, so Brewer's Gold and Strisel Spout. I can never really find either of those, so I like using Hallertauer, and also English hops that sort of herbal or floral or spicy, anything like that should really work. It is a malt forward beer, so you're not really looking for much hop aroma or much character from that. So moving on to yeast, so this is really I think where there is a lot of divergence from the style sometimes. So there are two releases from White Lab, so French Ale and Artisan Country Ale. They are only released in, I think, May and June, so it's quite hard to get those. I like using sort of German ale yeast, so yeast 1007, or any sort of Kolsch yeast should help you get in that sort of not massive yeast character, really. So lots of people do tend to use saison yeast, but that's not appropriate. So there is a Y yeast one, it's called Bière de Garde, but that's from Phantom, so it's not even a Bière de Garde yeast, so that probably wouldn't be recommended.
Luke, have you managed to get hold of the Vault and Platinum releases from White Labs in the past?
Yeah, I've used the 72 before. Malt Miller used to sell it, but they haven't for some years. Okay. And 73, I think the homebrew company in Ireland, I think they had it at some point, but I've not tried that one myself. I think that's relatively recent. So yeah, sort of the key thing here. Some of the commercial breweries use a lager yeast, but most tend to use an ale yeast just at lower temperatures. And once fermentation is finished, you have a lagering period of sort of 4 to 6 weeks. So packaging, sort of mid to high carbonation levels, not as much as you might have in a saison. They tend to come in champagne style bottles, corked and caged. So is that the photo a bit earlier on? That is sort of how they're done commercially. So previous versions of the BJCB guidelines reference sort of a musty character that they said was important for the style, but that has been revised and recognised that actually that's just a symptom of poor handling, essentially, and it's not how it would taste if you're having it in France. So I've done a couple of recipes. So I've not done one for brown because it's not something I've ever had or brewed. So I've got a blonde recipe from Mean Brews. Don't know if anyone ever watches that on YouTube. It's quite interesting. Very sort of data driven. And then an amber, which is my recipe, which scored 38 at Lab Open. So this sort of this recipe, so those that don't know about Mean Brews, I think he essentially gets recipes from home brewers that have done well in competitions, and then he runs the data and essentially picks what he thinks should do well at a competition based on the recipes that people have provided him with. So this sort of goes against some of the things I just said. So he uses Belgian ale, which isn't the most expressive Belgian yeast strain, but it is still more expressive than you'd expect. And it's got quite a lot of different malts in there and sugar as well. So I've not tried this one myself, but I thought it was quite fun to put in there. So this is mine. So based mostly with lager malt. I've used Europils before, and I quite like Warminster have done one with Utopian. So I think I'm going to give that a try as well. A bit of Vienna, Munich aromatic, a bit of sugar, and then just some midnight wheat for colour, which I now can't seem to get hold of. So Carafa Special, anything like that should be fine. And 1007. It's quite a low diacetyl producer, but just always safe to give it a diacetyl rest and then lagered it for 6 weeks. That was then kegged. So yeah, that's sort of a whistle-stop tour, if you like. Here's some resources if anyone wants to find out a bit more about it. So as I said, Markowski's book mostly features on Saison, but there is half of it really is about Bière de Garde, and he sort of goes into the history and gives a couple of, not recipes, but guidelines really. That's about it. So thank you for listening.
Cool. Thank you, Luke. Have a little round of applause. I'll have some questions. So just interested on the malt side of things, given that it's sort of meant to be a malty beer. What is there a reason why you'd stay away from some of the sort of more flavorful English malts, or could that have a place in it when it's sort of?
I think it could do. So in the book, Markowski says that sort of the French malts have a particular character which you probably don't find in anything else. So yeah, I just use lager because, especially Europils, it's pretty boring, but there's enough sort of character malts in there, I think, that make up for that. But possibly if you were doing sort of the traditional style with a long boil and not coloured malts, then yeah, perhaps something like half and half lager and Marisota or something like that might be.
Yeah, because it'd be interesting as a showcase for sort of the right English malt, but I guess yeah, you'd have to find the right one, whether it's like when as you said, the Europils is very bland. I would say it's like, to me, it's like for everything that people say about American two-row malt, that's kind of like the closest thing I think that we can get to it.
It's cheap though.
Yeah, it is cheap, and yeah, it's gets out of the way for anything else you want to have in the beer. But yeah,
I haven't really, other than the Warminster Utopian one, I've not tried any of the sort of English malts as other lager malts. So that's probably something I might have a look at doing next.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, like, so they've done like the Crisp, for example, have done like the Hannah malt.
Yeah.
Just sort of old Pilsner malt kind of thing, really. Or sort of heirloom barley that's meant to be a sort of for Pilsner and stuff like that. So one of the sort of one of those, or a floor malted sort of Pilsner or something like that, might just add a bit more character to it. And what was the feedback you got from Lab Open?
I think, yeah, it was really useful. I think.
What did you take away from it? Let's put it that way.
Better bottling procedure. I think I got a Kegland. I can't remember what is it called. But it goes into the tap and then you bottle from
one of those Nuka taps.
Yeah, that's it. Tap bottler. Yeah, so it was the first time I was using it. That was my first competition as well. So yeah, I probably should have tried a few times, but I think timing wise, I was just sort of, there wouldn't have been time for me to do it much earlier. It sort of cleared up quite well, but very late on, because I was drinking it a week before the competition. It still had a fair bit of haze, which is fine for the style, but then it dropped clear sort of the weekend of the competition almost, I think.
You said that Saison yeast would be inappropriate. Is that because of the flavor profile of the Saison yeast, or because of a kind of cultural?
So it's purely down to flavor. So it's a malt forward beer that there isn't very much yeast character whatsoever. So you don't want things like phenols or really much by way of esters. So I think some people do, and they just might do it at a lower temperature than you would a Saison, and it seems to do well. I mean, I've never done it, but maybe that's another thing I'll add to my to-do list.
So apart from the strength, maybe, how would a Bière de Garde compare to maybe something like a Marzen?
I've never brewed a Marzen, so I don't know. And James.
Okay.
I don't know. I didn't dare. A Bière de Garde will be stronger because it's going to be up at the sort of 6 to 8.5% strength, whereas a Marzen is definitely should be a bit below 6 at the max, I would say. Otherwise, it gets a bit heavy. And I'm trying to think as well. What else would be
It's probably closer to a Bock than any other style, I'd say.
Yeah. I'm just having a look at the BJCP guidelines to try and see what it says around sort of esters, and because I've always got a little something out of these, but only a little bit, and it's then as you said, it's just the rest of it is just malt, but not in the kind of deeper, darker malt like you get in a Marzen or a Bock. I mean, yes, a rich, toasty, a little bit of hop. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of said similar to Bock, but perhaps slightly different malt profile.
Right, but you do lager it for a long time. I think you said 6 weeks, did you?
Yeah. So it's generally an ale yeast sort of at maybe 16 to 18 degrees. Some of the commercial breweries do use a lager yeast at higher temperatures than you'd expect for a lager yeast. And then, it's guarded, which is the lager.
Yeah.
For really a minimum of 6 weeks, I'd say, but it could be much longer.
So after 6 weeks, is it then kind of at its best, but stays good for months afterwards?
I'd say if it's bottle conditioned, then you'd probably, when I've done it before, I sort of brew sort of spring, and then I wouldn't really want to be drinking it till around Christmas time, really. But that's with bottle conditioned. So
most of my beers don't last that long.
So could I just ask, when you're fermenting an ale yeast at those low temperatures, is that the key thing to that? Is you're not producing as many esters at those low temperatures?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just comparing the Dunkel Bock to the Bière de Garde style guidelines, and it's at least the numbers are very similar. Bière de Garde can go stronger, but in every other way, it's very similar. I mean, and maybe the Bock is a bit darker.
I had two questions for Luke, actually. I think in terms of the low temperature, do you tend to get stuck fermentations with that, or is the yeast fairly happy there? And I suppose in terms of the flavour, I always kind of think, when I think of Bière de Garde, I always do think farmhouse beers and a certain rustic kind of flavour. But would you actually describe the flavour profile as fairly, I want to say clean, but I suppose kind of clean maltiness, or is there actually a lot going on in the taste?
Yeah, I understand what you mean by rustic. So it is in a sense that it is sort of toasty, rather than clean. But I wouldn't say it's you typically wouldn't have non-malt adjuncts, so wheat, rye, things like that. So it doesn't have that sort of rustic character that you might have in a saison.
Gotcha. So probably just best to drink a few samples really and figure out what it's supposed to be like. Yeah,
I mean, I think I had my first one from Utopia, the cage, Borough Market. So they had San Silvestre Trois Mont, but La Choulette Ambre is probably my favourite. But they are relatively clean. I mean, sort of when I've described it to other people, they're fairly boring beers. They're not, hoppy in your face, or there's not loads of yeast character, but they're fairly neutral in a way. But it's just all about the malt. So if you like malty beers, then I think, it's something you'd enjoy.
Interesting. And is the fermentation tricky? Does it kind of take a while to kick off, or is it fairly open to abuse?
I mean, I've never had any issues either using the French ale strain or 1007. So I think that can probably go down a bit lower than 16. So I tend to go for the mid range of what the yeast manufacturer says fermentation range.
And with the starter, I'm guessing is it's wet yeast.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
I was going to ask as well about the hops, because I know that you used to be able to get some of the sort of Alsace region hops. I just don't see them anymore.
No, I used Aramis before, which is good. But I haven't seen any of the French hops really anywhere. I think Cross My Loof do some, but not Aramis. Bar Bruges, I think, is the one most people, but that probably wouldn't be suitable in this style. It's a bit more expressive than you'd probably be looking for.
The one I seen is Strissel Spalt, I think, was the one I've seen before, but I just don't really see it around here anymore. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? No. Okay. You covered the subject entirely then.
I'd say try and find some styles, even if it is Good Ale from Morrison's. But I think it's great.
I think it's one of those.
Start. That might be the place to start, is going to Morrison's and buying the one that you've mentioned, the Good Ale, is it?
La Good Ale. Yeah, it comes in sort of. Let me see if I don't think I've got any of the bottles, but it's quite sort of it stands out on the shelf because of the bottle. It's sort of their own design, I assume. You don't really see anything else, even if it's sort of really long, thin neck.
Here we go.
I don't know much about them, and I'm guessing from
there you go.
lack of questions that everyone else is a bit kind of rabbit in the lights, not sure quite what we're talking about.
No, I'll throw my oar in here. Sorry, I was just a bit busy when the questions came up. Yeah, I've done a couple of camping trips in France and was always just kind of pulling bottles off the shelves. And like some of the comments earlier, like I agree with it. The commercial varieties tend to be very clean. And like the boring comment is a little bit harsh, but it is fairly true that they're quite one-dimensional is that they've got one thing they want to showcase, and that's going to be it. And it'll be a little bit different in the paler styles versus the amber styles. The amber style dominates. It represents most of what you can actually easily get. And I think I actually have had the brown ones,
Okay.
but yeah, you know, you've got this weird kind of independent brewery market in France. It's a lot easier to set up. So it's like the separation between home brewers and smallest commercial brewers is not so much a thin line as a very large overlap. And you get some people doing some weird stuff, like using like chestnut honey in a brown Bière de Garde, which is like going to be way off style. If anyone's ever used chestnut honey, you know it's a crazy thing. And so you get a little bit of it, but yeah, mostly though, it's in terms of what ones are the best. Of the ones I find, John Lane is easy to get. 12 ounce would be probably my preferred ones, the ones that are easy to get. And, you know, and at that point, you'd find the really interesting stuff as easily in Borough Market as you would in a Carrefour in the north of France. So, but like just another thing, we made a Bière de Garde for a barrel project here. And in all the typical fashion, we never saved any bottles of the unbarreled beer. So we actually did a pretty good job of we actually used a lager yeast at about 16C. Would have got a little bit of character, and I'm just trying to remember the malt bill. You know, we actually went out of our way. I think we got like Chateau, it's Belgian malt.
Yeah.
So that's what we would have used, because you know you can't get the French stuff. But we weren't too bothered about recreating an authentic Bière de Garde when we're just going to put it into a crazy ass barrel. So, but yeah, and I've got some kegs of that lying around that I've yet to taste. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting beer. You find, I think we are on the border of Belgium and France. We could get good representations of Belgian beer and good representations of French beer side by side, and you can find a lot of the well-known Belgian examples that would be closest to a Bière de Garde always taste a little bit cleaner or a little bit more professionally produced. Some of the Bière de Garde, some of that kind of, I wouldn't trying to use proper words, but they're kind of coming off a bit second best in kind of professional cleanliness. Okay. So you get a little bit, you can detect some of the rough edges if you put it side by side against bigger competition from a couple of 100 kilometers away. But yeah, it's good style and worth seeking out, simply because you don't see a lot of showcases for strong, pale, malty beer. It's quite unusual. You know, it's everyone expects you're going to give me a 6 or 7% pale beer. I'm going to want a lot of hops. I'm going to want a lot of weird stuff or a lot of yeast character. And just on that basis is we're kind of seeking it out. That's me.
I was going to ask, whether using the sort of lager yeast slightly warmer would just give you that sort of nice balance of a little bit of ester, but not too much.
It's a bit of a cheat, I know. But you know, a lot of the commercial breweries do it as well. But the commercial breweries using a lager yeast would actually have a much cleaner product, just down to like the process 15, 16C. They get away with it. You know, it's you mightn't necessarily get away with that too easily, but I think most commercial lager yeast strains like 3470 would probably be okay at 16C. You get away with that. And Nottingham gone clean. So if you want to really dial in on the malty component of it, it's easy enough to control the yeast character without going mad at starters and all that.
Interesting. Sorry, Luke, what were the other
these lines from some basic pale ale malt and something like a clean yeast like SO5, I don't know, and just a little bit of any old hops almost, because it sounds like it's kind of, the malt is what you're looking for in something that's clean and fairly strong, obviously.
Yeah.
All right, I might fool you. I might just brew a strong, boring pale ale.
I mean, it's one of those things like it's you don't really know until you try it, and I think that the idea of using a sort of American ale yeast or something like that could work well, because then I've found like the particular Y yeast 1056 is incredibly clean, and gets out of the way of all the flavors, so hops and malt. So works quite well if you want to sort of have the malt express itself. Then it's not sort of doesn't mute anything, but it doesn't produce any esters whatsoever if you ferment it right. So definitely there could be something in that.
It sounds like it could be kind of in the flavor profile anyway, even if it's not strictly culturally correct. If you produce something like that with a bit, I don't know, a bit of melanoidin or something, just to give it a bit of maltiness, a little bit of carafa special, as you say, give a bit of colour.
I mean, you get to a point with, at least with the BJCP competitions, where with something like that, if it kind of fits in the parameters, then if it's a good beer, it will just stick out, and then that's how it sort of how you end up pushing it up from the high 30s or whatever, or to into the 40s. It's the judges will give it some leniency, but yeah. I'm just trying to look again. Like, I think it's the same that the guidelines say some esters. So
I missed it, but Wilderness Tasting, they had one, didn't they?
they did, yeah.
Yes,
It was quite nice.
It
was clean.
Yeah. Okay. So they're sort of more into the funky stuff, aren't they? But
yeah, no, they'd intentionally done this one that was clean, and it was
Okay.
nice. Yeah, when comparing the that between that and Bock earlier, when I said it did sort of say the Bière de Garde, so so yeah, low to moderate esters in aroma and flavour. So it's not none. A little bit would be fine. So perhaps, yeah, I mean, I would wonder about using a slightly warm lager yeast maybe, but try it, see. It's not one of those ones where, unfortunately, it's been brewed by people millions of times, so they can tell you exactly how to brew it, like an American Pale Ale. Definitely a more difficult one.
Would there be a case for some of the actual genuine examples possibly falling out of BJCP guidelines because it's a bit of a mute point as to whether even the funky, well, not the funkiness, but that farmyard taste. So I'm still interested in, because if that was due to bad handling of the beers getting over to America, does that mean that it has to be treated carefully? In other words, does it have to be kept lagered and then drunk within a particular time frame?
I don't know what caused them to reassess that like mustiness anyway. But yeah, I think it was just, you know, not being stored in the right way. A lot of the times you might have green bottles as well, green champagne bottles. So you might have that affect the light striking and things like that.
You had issues with the English ales as well. I'm saying it was going to taste of sherry and stuff like that. And it's like, no, that's what's happened when it's spent like 4 months in a container ship at sort of 60 degrees basically the entire time. It's going to murder your beer. So by the time the proper fresh versions finally made it there, or people went, no, that's nothing what it like it should be. So they reassessed the British ones for 2015. But it sounds like they're getting better with the other ones as well now. So yeah, I think a lot of it was down to beer getting to the US in very poor condition. Cool. Okay. Well, if we're out of questions, then it's kind of just thank you very much again, Luke, for doing the presentation.
All right. Thank you.
And yeah, just kind of really open to the floor to people to talk about whatever they want to talk about, really.